Anna Kowalski had an idea. It came to her the way good ideas often do, suddenly, completely, while she was doing something else entirely. She was hanging laundry on the line, watching the autumn wind snap the sheets like sails, when she noticed how Pepper, their border collie, had burrowed into the hay pile near the barn. Just his nose poked out, the rest of him completely buried in golden straw. He looked ridiculously comfortable, and when Anna called him, he didn't budge. Too warm, too cozy, too smart to leave his perfect little nest. If it works for a dog, Anna murmured to herself, why not for a calf? Dakota Territory, autumn of 1887. Every rancher in the territory had the same problem, keeping newborn calves warm through the brutal winter months. The barns were too big, too drafty, impossible to heat properly. Calves born in January faced a hard first week, and not all of them made it. Anna had lost a few herself over the years, and each loss had stayed with her not as a weight, but as a question. There had to be a better way. There was always a better way, if you were stubborn enough to find it. Watching Pepper in his hay pile, she finally saw the answer. This year would be different. This year, she had a plan. You want to build a what? Her husband, Pyotr, stood in the doorway of their sod house, watching her sketch circles in the dirt with a stick. A dome, Anna said, out of hay bales, like an igloo, but made of straw instead of ice. An igloo. For cows. For calves. Newborn calves. The hay will insulate them, keep their body heat in, keep the wind out. I can make it small enough that 2 or 3 calves will warm the whole space just by breathing. Pyotr was a patient man he had to be, married to a woman who had ideas the way other women had headaches, but even his patience had limits. Anna, we need that hay to feed the cattle through winter. We can't waste it building houses for babies. It's not waste. The calves can eat the walls when spring comes. Nothing is lost. The neighbors will think we've gone crazy. The neighbors lose calves every winter, same as everyone else. Let them think what they want. Pyotr sighed the sigh of a man who had learned to recognize when argument was futile. He had seen that look in Anna's eyes before when she had insisted on digging the root cellar deeper than anyone thought necessary, when she had demanded they buy the expensive glass windows instead of oiled paper, when she had spent 3 weeks building a chicken coop that the other farmers called a palace for poultry. Every time, she had been right. The root cellar had saved their vegetables during the flood of '85. The glass windows let in enough light to grow herbs on the windowsill all winter. The chickens laid eggs straight through January, while everyone else's hens went dormant. How many bales? He asked, already resigned. 40, maybe 50. I'll need help with the upper rows. And where exactly are you planning to build this hay igloo? Anna pointed to a spot near the barn, sheltered from the north wind by a low rise in the prairie. There. Close enough to check on them easily, far enough that the cows won't knock it down. Pyotr looked at the spot, looked at his wife, looked at the endless gray sky that promised the winter to come. Fine, he said. But when the neighbors laugh, I'm laughing with them. The construction began in late October, after the last hay had been cut and baled and stacked in the barn. Anna started with the foundation, a ring of bales laid flat on the ground, forming a circle about 12 feet across. The bales were heavy, 40 pounds each, and wrestling them into position left her arms aching and her back screaming. But she had handled hay bales since she was a girl in Poland, helping her father on their small farm outside Krakow, and her body remembered the rhythm even when her muscles protested. Pepper, their border collie, watched the whole process with the intense attention of a dog who suspected something important was happening but couldn't quite figure out what. He circled the growing ring of bales, sniffing each one, occasionally barking at nothing in particular. You'll understand when it's finished, Anna told him. Guard the calves. That's your job. Pepper wagged his tail, apparently satisfied with this explanation. The first ring took most of a day. 12 bales, positioned end to end, with gaps filled by half bales she cut with a hay saw. The circle wasn't perfect. She had to adjust several times before the ring closed properly, but it was solid, and that was what mattered. The second ring went on top of the first, but offset inward by about 6 inches. This was the key to the dome structure. Each successive ring would be slightly smaller than the one below, creating the curved wall that would eventually close overhead. Anna had seen pictures of Inuit igloos in a book at the Territorial Library, had studied the way they stacked blocks of snow in a spiral that leaned inward until it formed a perfect dome. Hay bales weren't ice blocks, but the principle was the same. She had spent weeks thinking about the design before starting construction. The critical insight was that a dome was inherently stronger than a flat roof. The curved shape distributed weight evenly, pressing each bale against its neighbors rather than pushing down on empty space. Snow could pile on top without collapsing the structure, and the round walls would deflect wind instead of fighting it head-on. The mathematics weren't complicated, but they were precise. Each ring had to be offset by exactly the right amount, too little, and the dome wouldn't close, too much, and the walls would collapse inward before the structure was complete. She had worked it out with string and stakes, laying out the circles on the ground before stacking anything, checking and rechecking her measurements until she was certain. Piotr had watched these preparations with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. His wife could barely read English, had never been to school beyond the age of 12, but she could calculate angles and weights and structural loads as if she had been born to it. Some minds just worked that way, he supposed. Some people saw the world in shapes and forces rather than words and numbers. By the end of the second day, she had 4 rings stacked, and the walls were beginning to curve noticeably inward. That was when the neighbors started coming to watch. Marcus Hendricks was the first, riding over from his claim 3 miles east on the pretense of borrowing a saw. "What in God's name is that?" he asked, staring at the half-built structure. "Calf shelter," Anna said, not pausing in her work. "Looks like a beaver dam had a baby with a haystack. It's going to be a dome, like an igloo." Marcus laughed, a full, genuine laugh that carried across the flat prairie. "An igloo. Anna, igloos are made of ice, in the Arctic, by Eskimos, not by Polish farm wives in Dakota. The Inuit build igloos because snow is what they have. I'm building with hay because hay is what I have. The principle is the same: trap warm air inside, keep cold air out. And you think this is going to keep calves warm in a Dakota winter? I think it has a better chance than that drafty barn of yours. How many calves did you lose last January, Marcus?" The laughter died. Marcus's expression flickered embarrassment, maybe, or the memory of small bodies he'd had to drag out of the barn and bury in frozen ground. 4, he admitted quietly. "I lost 3. Piotr's brother in Minnesota lost 6. The Olsons lost their whole late crop, 7 calves, all dead within a week." Anna drove another bale into position with more force than necessary. "Every rancher in the territory loses calves to the cold, every single winter, and nobody does anything different. They just shrug and say that's how it is. Well, I'm tired of that's how it is. I'm going to try something else." Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching her work. "You really think it'll make a difference?" "I don't know. But I know doing nothing doesn't work. At least this is doing something." He rode away without borrowing the saw, but Anna noticed he kept looking back at the structure as he went, wondering, maybe, or just memorizing details so he could describe the crazy Kowalski woman to everyone he met. Let him talk. Let them all talk. Anna had work to do. The dome grew higher over the following week, each ring smaller than the last. each course requiring more effort to lift the bales into position. By the 6th ring, she needed the ladder. Pyotr held it steady while she climbed, a bale balanced precariously on her shoulder, and placed each one with careful precision. The walls were leaning inward at a sharp angle now, and she had to work quickly if she waited too long between bales. The unsupported edge might collapse. "This is insane," Pyotr muttered, watching her struggle with a particularly heavy bale. "You said that yesterday." "It was true yesterday. It's still true today." "Then why are you helping?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because you lost 3 calves last winter and cried for a week. Because I can't stand to see you go through that again. Because, maybe," he paused, adjusting the ladder as she climbed higher. "Maybe you're right. Maybe doing something crazy is better than doing nothing at all." Anna smiled down at him. "That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it." The 7th and 8th rings went up in a single long day, Anna working until her arms trembled and her fingers could barely grip the baling twine. The dome was nearly closed now, just a small opening at the top that she would seal with a final capstone bale. But first, she needed to address the entrance. She had left a gap in the lower rings on the south side, an opening about 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, big enough for a calf to walk through, small enough to retain heat. Now she framed this opening with boards salvaged from a broken wagon, creating an archway that would support the bales above it and keep the entrance from collapsing. The arch was tricky. She had never built one before, had only seen them in books about Roman architecture that she had borrowed from the library during a particularly boring winter. But the principle seemed straightforward. Wedge-shaped pieces at the top, pressing against each other, transferring the weight down to the uprights on either side. She built a temporary wooden form to support the arch while the framing was installed, then carefully removed it once everything was secure. The arch held. The entrance gaped like an open mouth, inviting and protective at the same time. "Now the cap," she said, more to herself than to Pyotr or Pepper, both of whom were watching with expressions of exhausted hope. The final bale was the hardest. She had to climb to the very top of the ladder, lean precariously over the opening, and lower the bale into place without falling through the hole or knocking the whole structure down. Pyotr held the ladder with white-knuckled hands, certain that any moment his wife would plummet into the hay dome, and he would have to explain to the neighbors how she died. But she didn't fall. The bale settled into place with a soft thump, sealing the dome, completing the structure. Anna climbed down on shaking legs and stood back to see what she had built. It looked, she had to admit, slightly ridiculous. A golden dome rising from the brown prairie, 10 feet tall and 12 feet wide, like something that belonged in a fairy tale rather than a working ranch. Snow had already begun to dust the top, giving it an even more igloo-like appearance. "It's beautiful," Pyotr said, surprising her. "You think so?" "I think it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. And also beautiful. Maybe those are the same thing." Pepper barked once, apparently in agreement. The first test came in mid-November, when one of their cows went into labor 3 weeks early. Anna had been checking the herd daily, watching for signs of imminent calving, and she spotted the cow, a young heifer named Bess, separating herself from the others just as the sun was setting. By the time full dark arrived, the calf was coming. It was a difficult birth. The calf was positioned wrong, and Anna had to reach in and turn it, her arm buried to the shoulder in the straining heifer, while Pyotr held a lantern and tried not to look too closely. When the calf finally slid out onto the frozen ground, it lay motionless for a terrible moment before coughing and beginning to breathe. A heifer calf. Small, but alive. The calf was the size of a large dog, wet and steaming in the cold air, too weak to stand but strong enough to lift her head and look around with confused newborn eyes. Anna felt the familiar surge of protective love that came with every birth. This tiny creature, minutes old, utterly dependent on the humans and animals around her for survival. This was the moment she had built the dome for. This was why she had spent weeks stacking hay bales and calculating angles and ignoring the neighbors who laughed. To give this little one a fighting chance. "Get her into the dome," Anna said, already gathering the wet, shivering newborn in her arms. Now, before she gets too cold, they carried the calf across the frozen yard to the hay igloo, Bess following anxiously behind. Inside, Anna had prepared a thick bed of loose hay, creating a nest that would cushion and insulate the newborn. She laid the calf down gently, then guided the mother in to begin licking her baby clean. The inside of the dome was remarkably warm, not hot, but noticeably warmer than the November night outside. The hay walls blocked the wind completely, and the curved ceiling trapped the rising heat from the animals' bodies. Within minutes, the small space felt almost cozy. "Stay with her," Anna told Bess, though the instruction was unnecessary. The heifer was already settling in beside her calf, her large body adding even more warmth to the enclosed space. Anna checked on them every 2 hours through the night, trudging out in the darkness with a lantern to peer through the entrance and make sure both mother and baby were still breathing. Each time, she found them exactly as she had left them, the calf nursing or sleeping, the mother watchful but calm, the hay igloo doing exactly what she had designed it to do. By morning, the calf was standing. By afternoon, she was walking. By the end of the week, she was as healthy and strong as any calf born in the warmth of summer. Word spread. The neighbors who had laughed at Anna's hay igloo stopped laughing when they heard about the premature calf that had survived a November birth. They came to see for themselves, standing outside the dome and peering through the entrance at the mother and baby inside. "It's warm in there," Marcus Hendricks reported to his wife when he returned home. "Actually warm. The calf is thriving. How is that possible? I don't know. Something about how the hay holds heat." Anna tried to explain it, but honestly, I don't care how it works. I care that it works. The Kowalski's second calf of the season came in early December, and it too went into the dome immediately after birth. Then a third in mid-December, and a fourth just before Christmas. The dome was getting crowded, 4 calves, and their mothers rotating through the space, but Anna had anticipated this. She had built the structure large enough to accommodate multiple animals, and she had developed a system. Newborns stayed in the dome for their first week, then moved to the barn once they were strong enough to handle the cold. The system worked. Every calf survived. January arrived with the worst cold snap in years. Temperatures plummeted to 35 below zero, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes, cold enough to kill any animal caught outside without shelter. The wind howled across the prairie, driving snow into drifts that buried fences and blocked doors. Anna and Pyotr huddled in their sod house, venturing out only to feed the livestock and check on the animals in the dome. Each trip was a battle 50 yards that felt like 50 miles. The cold stealing breath and burning lungs, the wind fighting every step. But the dome held. The hay walls, compressed by the weight of snow that had accumulated on top, formed an even better insulator than before. Inside, the temperature stayed above freezing, even when outside it was 40 degrees below. The calves barely noticed the apocalyptic cold raging beyond their hay walls. 3 more were born during the cold snap. All 3 survived. Anna spent much of those terrible weeks inside the dome herself, sleeping in the hay beside the calves when temperatures dropped too low to risk leaving them alone. She would bundle up in every piece of warm clothing she owned, crawl through the entrance, and curl up in the corner while the mother cows watched her with placid acceptance. The calves grew accustomed to her presence, nosing at her pockets for treats, sleeping pressed against her for extra warmth. It was strange, living in a hay dome with cattle. Strange, but also wonderful in ways she hadn't anticipated. The animals breathed and shifted and made small sounds through the night, a living warmth that was different from any fire. The hay smelled of summer, of sunshine and growth, a reminder that this frozen hell was not permanent. And the calves, those fragile creatures she had built all this to protect, thrived before her eyes, growing stronger each day despite the murderous cold outside. She talked to them during those long nights, told them about Poland, about the farm where she had grown up, about the grandmother who had taught her that every problem had a solution if you were stubborn enough to find it. She told them about the voyage to America, the seasickness and the fear and the wild hope that had driven her across an ocean to a land she had never seen. She told them about meeting Piotr, about building this ranch from nothing, about the 3 calves she had lost last winter, and the determination that loss had sparked. The calves listened with the patient attention of creatures who didn't understand words but recognized kindness. They butted their heads against her hands and licked her fingers and fell asleep in warm piles that she photographed in her memory, knowing she would want to remember this when the winter finally broke. Meanwhile, across the territory, the losses mounted. The Hendricks lost 5 calves, the Olsons lost 8. The Petersons, whose ranch was 10 miles north, lost their entire late crop 11 calves, dead within hours of birth, their small bodies no match for the killing cold. When the weather finally broke in late January, the neighbors came to count the dead. At the Kowalski Ranch, there were no dead to count. How? The question came from Thomas Olson, standing outside the hay dome with his hat in his hands and desperation in his eyes. He had lost 8 calves and 3 adult cows to the cold snap. His family was facing ruin. How did you save them all? Anna gestured to the dome behind her. Hay insulates. The walls are 2 feet thick. That's enough to stop the cold from getting through. The curved shape holds heat better than a square building. And the entrance faces south, away from the worst winds. But hay, it's just dried grass. How can it keep anything warm? The same way a bird's nest keeps eggs warm, or a bear's den keeps cubs alive through winter. Trapped air. The hay is full of tiny air pockets, and air is one of the best insulators there is. The bales trap the warmth that the calves produce and keep it from escaping. Thomas stared at the dome, shaking his head slowly. I've been ranching for 15 years. Never seen anything like this. Neither have I. I made it up. You made it up? I looked at the problem and tried to imagine a solution. The old ways weren't working. We all lose calves every winter, and we all just accept it because that's how it's always been. I decided to stop accepting it. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. Can you show me how to build one? I can show anyone who wants to learn. That spring, Anna taught 12 ranching families how to build hay igloos. She walked them through the process, step by step. How to lay the foundation ring, how to offset each successive course, how to create the entrance arch, how to seal the top. She explained the principles behind the design, air insulation, heat retention, wind protection, and answered their questions with the patience of someone who had asked the same questions herself not long ago. Some of the students were skeptical, some were desperate, some were just curious. But all of them built domes, and all of them had something new to try when the next winter came. The following year, calf losses across the valley dropped by half. The year after that, they dropped by half again. By 1892, hay igloos had become standard practice across the northern territories. Ranchers who had never met Anna Kowalski were building domes based on plans that had been copied and shared and modified dozens of times. Agricultural journals published articles about the technique. The Territorial Extension Service sent agents to study the structures and write reports. Some builders improved on her original design. A rancher in Montana developed a method for using round bales instead of rectangular ones, creating larger domes that could shelter adult cattle during blizzards. A farmer in Minnesota experimented with adding a small stove inside the dome. Though Anna thought this was unnecessary and dangerous, the animal's own body heat was sufficient, and fire near hay was a recipe for disaster. A group of Lakota ranchers on the Pine Ridge Reservation adapted the technique using traditional knowledge about winter shelter construction, creating hybrid structures that combined the best of both approaches. Anna welcomed all of it. She had never considered the design to be hers alone. It belonged to anyone who needed it, to anyone who had lost animals to the cold and wanted to stop losing them. When people wrote to her asking for advice, and they did, letters arriving from across the country as word of her success spread, she answered every one, drawing diagrams and explaining principles and encouraging experimentation. "Try different things," she wrote in one letter that was later published in a farming magazine. "Every ranch is different. Every climate is different. Every situation is different. The important thing is not to copy what I did exactly. The important thing is to understand why it worked and then figure out what will work for you. The principle is simple. Small spaces, good insulation, protection from wind. Everything else is details." Anna never sought credit. She never patented the design or tried to profit from its spread. When people asked where the hay igloo had come from, the old-timers would mention a Polish woman in Dakota who had gotten tired of losing calves, but most people didn't care about origins. They cared about results, and the results spoke for themselves. Anna Kowalski lived until 1923, dying at 71 on the ranch she and Piotr had built from nothing. She had raised 6 children, all of whom survived to adulthood, remarkable for the frontier, where childhood was a gamble that many lost. She had helped deliver hundreds of calves over the decades, most of them in the hay dome that she rebuilt every autumn and disassembled every spring. She had taught 3 generations of her family the techniques she had developed, the principles she had discovered, the stubborn insistence on trying something different when the old ways failed. Piotr had died 5 years before her, peacefully, in the bedroom they had shared for 43 years. Pepper had been gone much longer. Dogs don't live as long as the people who love them, but she had never been without a border collie since, each one trained to guard the calves the way the first Pepper had done. Her children found her notebooks after she died, filled with sketches and calculations and observations about animal husbandry, weather patterns, and the properties of various building materials. On the first page of the oldest notebook, in handwriting that had faded but remained legible, was a single sentence. "If it works for a dog in a hay pile, why not for a calf? Build them something warm." The hay igloo technique is still used today, more than a century after Anna first stacked bales in a circle on the frozen prairie. Modern versions use different materials, sometimes plastic-wrapped round bales, sometimes purpose-built calf hutches based on the same principles, but the core idea remains unchanged. Small spaces retain heat better than large ones. Insulation saves lives, and doing something different is better than accepting losses that everyone else has decided are inevitable. Anna would have appreciated the legacy, though she probably would have shrugged it off. She didn't build the first hay igloo to become famous, or to change the cattle industry, or to prove a point about innovation. She built it because she was tired of crying over dead calves, tired of feeling helpless against the cold, tired of watching the same tragedy repeat itself year after year. She built it because she remembered watching calves struggle through cold winters, remembered wishing she could do more to help them. She built it because hope can either sit idle or drive you forward, and she had chosen to let it drive her toward something better. Her grandmother had told her once, back in Poland when she was still a girl learning to work the farm, "The world is full of problems that people have decided cannot be solved. Most of those people are wrong. They have simply given up too soon." Anna never gave up. Not on the design when it seemed impossible. Not on the calves when they were too weak to stand. Not on the neighbors who laughed until they saw the results. She kept building, kept improving, kept sharing what she learned with anyone who wanted to listen. She built it because she looked at a problem that everyone else had accepted and decided that acceptance wasn't good enough. The neighbors had laughed at first. Of course, they had a hay dome for baby cows, built by a stubborn Polish woman who didn't know her place. They weren't laughing by spring. They were building their own.